Well, thanks again. Let's see here. Now, good morning. Back in October 2002, the suburbs around Washington, D.C. were on pins and needles. Somebody started shooting people in shopping center parking lots. Since nobody saw where the bullets were coming from, they'd surmised that it was a sniper. But for 3 weeks, people didn't know what was going on or why. 10 people were killed, 3 others injured. After about the 2 weeks at a truck stop, a group of truckers got together and just prayed that they would find out who was doing this and why. One of them was a fellow named Ron Lance, and as they got done praying, he said, I just have the feeling that somebody in this room is going to be instrumental in finding, this person. And Ron Lance, oddly enough, was just a few weeks away from retiring as a trucker. But a few days later, he was coming back through the Washington, D.C. area in the middle of the night. As he got just north of Washington, D.C., he had been listening to the radio, and they said that they've got a lead that they think the person responsible is driving a dark blue Chevy Caprice. And he pulled into he just decided to pull into this rest area right afterwards. And as he's driving in, what does he see but a dark blue Chevrolet Caprice? And it had New Jersey plates, which is what they said they were looking for on the radio. So he called the police, and they said, okay, we're on our way. Could you block the exits from the rest area? And sure enough, he was able to get a couple of other truckers to just help him. This is like at 3 in the morning. He said, and then we waited for the longest 15 minutes of our life. But sure enough, they came and they caught the 2 men who were actually in the Chevrolet Caprice. Turns out that this Caprice had been rigged so that you could actually lay out in the back seat to the end of the trunk, and of course those things had huge trunks, and there were holes by the taillights that he could shoot through, and that's what he was doing. And it was found out long afterwards that it turns out he was doing it to cover up the murder of his wife, his ex-wife. He shot her in a parking lot and all. But the interesting thing in the weeks that followed is there were all these questions about, well, did the trucker's prayers really cause the guy to be found? And of course, as a minister, and of course, it was in October 2002. This was just a few months after Carla and I graduated from the seminary. But it's interesting because the word prayer, people react to it. They'll either react with just this kind of knowingness or fond memories, and there'll be other people that just have this cynicism about it. And, I know having grown up Catholic in Chicago, I've known a lot of people that have prayed and not gotten the results that they're seeking. So there's this attitude of does prayer really work? And that's why this whole debate about whether these truckers' prayers caught this guy was interesting to me, because it was so obvious that it was coming from the perspective of each individual and what they had experienced in prayer in their lives. Prayer is the most dynamic act of the mind possible to human beings. I'll say that again. Prayer is the most dynamic act of the mind possible to human beings. As a unity minister, I have no attachment to proving to somebody that prayer works. It's a trial and error sort of a thing. But I do find that if I meet someone who, like me when I was a kid, was feeling that unworthiness and wasn't seeing results from my prayers, I said, well, think of other things that you tried when you were a kid that you didn't like or didn't get good results on. And when you tried them later as an adult, didn't you find that everything was fine? That you had a much better, more pleasant outcome? Did you like spinach when you were a kid or broccoli when you were a kid? Of course, some people don't like it as adults either, but you get the point. You might want to try it again. Now, the nice thing about being in unity is I found that virtually everyone who walks into a unity center is at least open to the idea that, yes, prayer can and does work, or sure are open to having people show them that, yes, prayer does work. Unity's heritage, of course, is prayer. You know, it was all started in the 1880s. Myrtle Fillmore in Kansas City had been told she had tuberculosis and a very short time to live, and she heard a lecture from a man talking about mind over matter and how if you meditate and focus on the body's chakras and the organs, you know, you can heal anything. And she said that the main sentence she always remembered is that if I'm a child of God, I do not inherit sickness. And so over a 2-year period, she would meditate daily, and sure enough, when there was no medical cure, she was cured of tuberculosis. And her husband, Charles Fillmore, was kind of like, well, boy, we got to learn more about this. And he plunged into a study of it. He, like he says, he uses the scientific method of, you know, just if this thing works, then it works. Let's prove it. And that's how Unity started. And then, of course, the neighbors couldn't help but notice, so they started holding prayer groups in their living room. And then they started receiving letters from people who wanted them to pray for them. And then, of course, time after time, in 1907, telephone started in the Silent Unity prayer room. So Silent Unity has been around for like 128 years. It's our 24/7 prayer room located there just outside of Kansas City. So we've got phones, we've got letters, we've got emails, we've got an app. We got the You Pray app, the letter You Pray app. You know, all of these things, and there's always somebody there 24/7 praying. And there's a little chapel there for all of the people who work there, whether they're writing letters or answering emails or answering the phone. You're assigned a 30-minute shift to sit in that chapel and just pray for all of the prayer requests that have come in. And in the circular chapel, there are 31 cabinets in which all of the prayers from that day are put in. And so they rotate around, and that's why all of the prayer requests are there for 30 days. The interesting thing about Unity, though, is that we've gotten a reputation for being successful in prayer, which is, you know, why I decided to call today's lesson Successful Prayer. There have been several attempts to do a scientific study of whether prayer works, and they usually have done it for like a medical scenario. It's kind of, you know, praying for someone and seeing. So there was this double-blind study, and it was at one of the hospitals in San Francisco. I think it was the University of San Francisco Hospital. And this was back about 20, 30 years ago. So they had all of the cardiac patients, and they'd be assigned a number. And then outside of Kansas City, there in Unity Village, there'd be somebody praying, and you'd get a number. And so you'd pray for the person that was represented by that number. You know, and usually in Unity, we pray by seeing the divine idea of perfect health. Okay, this person's a cardiac patient, don't know who they are, but I just see that perfect wholeness that's at the very essence of who they are, and their body can heal and reach that wholeness. And it turns out the Unity study was the only one that showed an effectiveness of prayer. And so that's when people really started paying attention. What does Unity do differently than anybody else? Well, I'm going to have Duncan put up the slide. So what is the secret of our success? Well, first, you need to believe that prayer works. If you don't believe it, it's not going to happen. Whatever we focus our mind upon expands. So if you've gotten no results in the past, are you willing to, like I said, try it again? Second, it's been proven over thousands of years by millions of people. You look into any Bible concordance, and I don't know if you're familiar with a concordance, and I've got one on my shelf in my study at home. Looks like a huge dictionary or encyclopedia thing, and what it has is every word of the Bible. You know, you go through the list, and so the word prayer, you get on the page, and it shows you where in each book the word prayer is used and the words around it. You know, and you've got hundreds and hundreds of references to prayer in the Bible. The fascinating thing about it is none of those references has a negative comment about it. It's always people saying, yes, do it. They recommend it. They command people to do it. They praise it. They give thanks that prayer works. So, and why? Like I said before, it's the most dynamic act of the mind possible to human beings. Third, we recognize that there is no separation between ourselves and God. And I know those of you who are here regularly, I hammer on this because it's so important. We are a spiritual being having a human experience. And we believe that God is the three omnis, that God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Omnipresent, God is everywhere. God is on the other side of the world. God is in every cell of your body. So you're connected with God at all times. There's nothing you can do to remove yourself from God. God is omnipotent, more powerful than any power in the physical world. Then omniscient, God knows, because one of the aspects of God, as we understand God to be, is the divine mind that gives us our ideas. And so if we believe that divine ideas exist, and we're willing to express them, we get these ideas in our mind. So as a prayer, we recognize, yes, we're connected with this thing, this unfathomable concept that there's this energy, this creative energy of the universe. And we can tap into that, and we can use it. And how do we use it? We use it through our imagination, through our thoughts, through our feelings, through our spoken word. So, if there is this great listening mind in the universe, as Charles Fillmore called it, then this listening mind responds to whatever prayers we put out. And we call this responding intelligence and power God. I want to share with you a series of observations which Charles Fillmore wrote concerning prayer in his book, Jesus Christ Heals. Now, those of you who are familiar, and then, of course, later today I'll be doing our What is Unity orientation class, and I'll be talking a little bit more about this. But Charles lived until the age of 93. And this book, Jesus Christ Heals, were a collection of his Sunday lessons or essays when he was in his 80s. It was like one of the last books published in his name. So in chapter 5 of this book, Jesus Christ Heals, it's titled The Omnipotence of Prayer. And Charles says, everybody should pray. Through prayer, we develop the highest phase of character. Prayer softens and refines the whole human being. Prayer is not supplication or begging, but a simple asking for that which we know is waiting for us at the hands of our Father, and or an affirmation that this thing that we want to see manifest exists. Jesus taught us to pray for what we want and to be persistent in our demands. People unfamiliar with our true relationship with God wonder why we should ask or even importune a Father who we are told has provided all things for us. This is explained when we see God as the great mind reservoir that must be tapped by the human mind and poured into visibility through man's imagination, thoughts, and spoken word. In the mind of a human being, if the mind of a human being is clouded with doubt, lethargy, or fear, that person must open the way through persistent knocking and asking. So you get a sense of, Unity's approach to prayer. I think it's interesting, at the beginning of this section, he talks about, sometimes we just pray to soften and refine ourselves as a human being. And then, of course, he talks about persistent prayer, where it's persistent in our demand. It's not a matter of trying to wear down God or convince God that you want this to happen. If God is, like I say, this complete creative energy, what we're really doing is wearing down our own misperceptions, our doubts, our fears about prayer. And if we can just let go of that unbelief. And you don't have to be 100% believing. Once you get to 51%, I find that divine presence comes and walks you the rest of the way. In the same chapter on page 74, Charles Fillmore says, then the real foundation of all effective prayer is an understanding that God is spirit and that man, God's offspring, is in the same image and likeness, therefore a spiritual being. Such a concept of God gives human beings a point of contact that is never absent. In all places and under all conditions, we have the assurance of the attention and help of God when we realize the Father's spiritual presence and comradeship. Now, you'll notice here, too, he mentions that we're always one with God. I know there have certainly been times in my life where I haven't felt like I was connected to God, but it was usually because I started to believe, that I wasn't connected with God for some reason. So it's really up to us to reconnect at those moments when we're having an amazing challenge in our life and we're kind of like, how is this going to happen? And like I said last week, one of my great affirmations that I've ever heard is, how is none of my business? If I know this is indeed something that I need to create or express in the world, I just need to go ahead and do it and know that this God presence is going to take care of the rest. Now, I want, for those of you who have been Unity students for some time, it's interesting because Unity, of course, has always had this emphasis on spoken prayer. And as I mentioned, this was one of Charles Fillmore's last books. And there's a question, what's better? Should I pray aloud or should I pray in the silence of meditation? And for most people to that point, they would have assumed that Charles would have said spoken. But on page 79, he says, I now think that silent prayer is more effective than audible, because by silent prayer, the mind comes into closer touch with the creative spirit within. So how do we pray? Ed Rabel, who he's passed away years ago now, but he taught at Unity Village. And he pointed out this as well, when people ask about how to pray, because there's so many people in Unity or some of the other New Thought movements say, the only way to pray is affirmative prayer. You state your truth and you say it in the present tense. He says, yeah, but we look at Jesus Christ as being our great way shower, so how did Jesus pray? And so when you look at those four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you see there are three categories of prayer that Jesus used. He used asking, affirming, and or giving thanks in advance. He says giving thanks afterwards is just simply etiquette or being polite. But if you give thanks in advance, knowing that it will come. An example I'll use is say, I got someone standing over there at the door, and here, my throat is dry like it was just a moment ago. I said, could you get me a glass of water? And they say, sure. And I say, thank you. It's like, well, I don't have the glass of water yet, but I have absolute certainty that water is going to be coming for me. In the Gospel of Matthew, 7th chapter, 7th verse, Jesus preached, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. And then in the 21st chapter, he says, and whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith that you can receive it. So it's important for us to expect good results in our prayer times. Now, it doesn't mean that we will get exactly what it is we're praying for, but trust that it'll be this or something better, Lord, which is often a lot of people in Unity use that as kind of a tagline on their prayers. Trusting God for the right answer to the prayer is more important than wondering if one is using the right technique or not. Martin Luther was a praying man. He was a professor of theology and started the whole Protestant Revolution in the 1500s when he nailed his manifesto to the wall of the Catholic Church in town, just basically saying, this is what I see what's wrong with the Catholic Church. So here's Martin Luther, and of course the Lutherans come from his last name. And he's a praying man, he knows how to pray, but his best friend is diagnosed with an illness and it looks like he's going to die any minute. And so Martin Luther stayed up all night praying, and he just was crying and begging, God to heal his friend. And the next day, his friend was healed. So did he use the wrong technique? No, he used whatever he needed at the time. So we don't have to cry and beg. But if you feel like you need to cry and beg, go ahead. We only have to trust God. And there are going to be times, though, that you and I are just going to feel too weak or discouraged to pray. And what do you do then? Well, what you do then is you ask somebody else to pray for you. Or you call silent unity. And of course, all of this information as far as prayer is on page 3 of the bulletin, as far as the silent unity contact information. But that's what happens, and just to share a secret with you, often when I visit somebody in the hospital or nursing home, I'll say, look, it's easy for Unity people to get caught up in what did I do to cause this? It's like, no, just let go of that kind of stuff. Right now, your body is just telling you need to give some attention to what it is that's going on, and you need some rest. So just allow other people to pray for you, and don't feel like you need to pray for yourself here for a few days. So in Unity, whenever we pray, we take just a moment or two to just pray for others, as I model often in our meditations. But when you pray for others, realize that whatever you're praying for should be something that you'd like to have happen to yourself. So praying in a positive manner, praying for good in others, all people to have their highest good unfolding. Because whatever you put out into the universe is going to come back multiplied. So, it really doesn't matter so much who is praying as long as somebody is. Now, as I touched on before, in addition to praying to see this desired good manifest in the world, there's this other kind of praying, and that is just to refine our consciousness, our awareness that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And an even higher level of that is we recognize that we as a group, and by a group I mean everybody on this planet, have formed something called the human race consciousness, that level of awareness around our globe. And so even if everything's going hunky-dory in your life and you can't think of anything specific you want to pray for in your own life, just pray to see the human race consciousness raised to a higher level than it is right now. So I'm going to have Duncan put up our takeaways for this week. The first three, of course, have already been up there. Number one, believe that prayer can work. If you haven't already proven it in your life, are you willing to prove it in your life here in these next 7 days? Number two, recognize it's been proven by millions of people over thousands of years in many different faiths. Number three, there is no separation between ourselves and God. You're always connected. God is always where you are. In fact, the Karen Taylor Good song, there is no spot that God is not. so yeah. Number four, pray for others and to raise the human race consciousness. Pray regularly. And why? Because prayer is the most dynamic act of the mind possible to a human being. Our closing video is about a man who recognized that persistence can indeed get him what it was he wanted.